Good morning, dear students, and welcome to our next lesson. This class will be devoted to load, outer and inner load, training methods, adaptation, and workload specifics. But before we start, I would like you to memorize the last class when we considered some workload characteristics. And for this class, we will go a little bit further and get more insight and get familiar with more details and specifications concerning workload. So let's start. Let's start with the concept of load. We have outer and inner workload. Outer load or workload describes the kind and extent of outer influence on a human being. It describes tasks from a physical, psychological, and intellectual point of view. This is one of the most important aspects of workload. Just a simple example. When we go to the weightlifting gym and try to adjust resistance equal to 20 kg. This is the outer workload. But due to individuality and unique organism that each of us have, we have a different reaction of our body, of our organism to this external factor, namely workload or outer load. That means that exists inner load. That means load effect. It describes how individual inner performance preconditions are used in order to perform an activity. And this load effect or inner load is very specific. It has a target capacity of our body that should be affected. For example, strength endurance or flexibility should have a different adaptation mechanisms. But in order to trigger, to start these adaptation mechanisms, we should design and adjust the workload, the effect, the factor. And this is the science, this is the knowledge and experience when we apply it in a weightlifting gym, for example. That's the difference between amateur or professional performers. And the third phenomenon on this slide is adaptation. Adaptation is an essential process or mechanism of our body. It describes how the organism adjusts to defined stimuli. This process can be proven for the athlete's conditioning with regard to metabolism and morphology. All these three phenomena are essential parts of the concept of the workload. They are interacting with each other, and if we have a training design or we have to plan our training session, we should consider each of them: adaptation, load effect, and workload. Let's consider how this concept of load correlated with these key elements with each other. This model of the correlation between outer load, inner load, and the development of sport performances shows us these three components. Let's start with the outer load. It could be low or no workload at all, medium or high, and extremely high. Let's start with low or no workload at all. What effect should it bring to our organism? Not challenging enough. What does it mean? That means that in order to start adaptation process, we should have enough stimuli or adequate stimuli. If resistance in weight lifting gym is too low, that means that it will bring us no effect. No strength endurance or maximal strength will be influenced and triggered to increase. And what's about development of performance? It brings stagnation or even degradation. That's why adequate physical activity in everyday basis is one of the essential part to maintain muscular tonus. Let's have a look on the medium or high out load. It brings optimal in load. This is the best option for beginners, for example, to have a training session. It doesn't matter, is it a weightlifting gym, track and field, stadium, volleyball hall, and so on. Optimal in load is the best option if we would like to have muscular hypertrophy, for example, or development of our endurance. And on the other hand, we would like to prevent our body, our organism from the injuries. So this is one of the best important aspect, optimal in load or moderate. What it brings to us in case of development of performance? Performance capacity develops, so it's a positive and a good reason to have a moderate or optimal in a load. Let's have a look to extremely high out load. Extremely high sounds not good, right? And this is right because it brings us overload and stagnation, degradation, or even injuries. That's why I strongly recommend you to avoid extremely high out load. Let's have a look to some guidelines that will facilitate training design process. Let's get familiar with FIT, namely frequency, intensity, time, and type. Of course, a reference to the book is provided, so if you have a time, you can always study more and get more specifics and examples. So FIT guidelines: frequency, intensity, time, and type. It is important for characteristics that allow us to bring structure to our training session or physical activity during everyday life. Safe and effective physical activity program design also is based on these four characteristics. Basic training principles are the scientific concepts that underlie program design decisions. That means all the data, all the information that provide us with this guideline is scientifically proven. So it's relatively safe to rely on this data, and also it's the best way to avoid some mistakes, overload, or even injuries. FIT guidelines represent the key decisions that need to be made to address an individual's physical activity and health-related fitness needs. So frequency. Let's have a look what does this parameter mean. Frequency describes how often a person performs the target physical activity. For each component of health-related fitness, the beneficial and safe frequency is generally 3 to 5 days per week, and aerobic fitness activities can be performed all or most days of the week. So frequency tells us how often we should have a training sessions a week, for example, in order to pursue a particular goal. It could be flexibility, it could be aerobic fitness, it could be strength endurance training, and so on. So frequency, one of the most important aspects of training that we should consider. Then the next one in these FIT guidelines is intensity, that describes how hard a person exercises and represents one of the most critical decisions in program design. The selection of appropriate exercise intensity depends on a number of factors, including the participants' development, readiness, personal goals, and current physical activity and fitness levels. So you see, intensity also is very important and very critical to our performance. For example, if we go to weightlifting gym, 20 kg is the parameter of intensity. This is the intensity characteristics that we try to manipulate with in order to make the workload optimal, adequate to our current physical fitness. So let's go to the third parameter, time or duration, that describes how long the activity should be performed. And the fourth one is type. Type refers to mode or what kind of activity a person chooses to perform. For example, a student may improve aerobic fitness by walking, cross-country skiing, or inline skating. Muscular fitness may be developed by contracting a muscle or muscle group against an external resistance provided by free weights, variable resistance machines, body weight, or medicine balls. So this is the FIT guidelines. It's a very short and brief presentation of this concept. And if you are willing to get more familiar with these guidelines, also the reference to this book is also provided. And after we considered FIT guidelines with these 4 elements, I would like you to familiarize yourself with basic training principles. The basic training principles are 5 elements. First is overload, after that progression, the third one is specificity, also regularity, and the fifth one, individuality. Principles describe how the body responds to the physiological stress of physical activity across all 5 components of health-related fitness. That means aerobic fitness, muscular strength, muscular endurance, flexibility, and body composition. All these basic training principles. Also, you can learn and study more precisely with more examples if you will follow the reference to the book that is also provided on this slide. And now let's have a look at all of these 5 basic training principles. And the first one is the overload principle, that states that the body system, cardiorespiratory, muscular or skeletal, must be stressed beyond what it is accustomed to in order to bring about a desired training adaptation. This principle is very important because without overload, for example, when the workload is the normal, we will have no stimuli, no effect, no trigger to start adaptation process. This is a key and fundamental aspect of training. So the third basic training principle is a specificity principle. that states that physical activity that produces training adaptations by stressing a particular body part or a system do little to affect other body parts or systems. Of course, if we are targeting our endurance, that means that our maximal strength ability will be not influenced or triggered to adapt and to increase this maximal strength. So endurance training or basic endurance training will bring to our body, to our organism, development of our cardiorespiratory system, but not our skeletal muscles in order to resist with some maximal weight, free weights, for example. This is also very interesting and fundamental principle. And if you are interested in more detailed familiarization or study with this principle, also there is a reference provided, so find in a specific database, and if you will have some questions, you can address it to me. So next principle is the regularity principle, based on the old adage, use it or lose it. That means that physical activity must be performed on a regular basis to be effective. So imagine if you have training sessions 1 or 2 weeks, and after that 1 month for the rest, so no training at all. What's the effect? What's the point? So this principle is very important in a systematic point of view. So consider and plan and design your training sessions in a row. That means you can plan more specific and more advanced targets or training goals in months or even in a year ahead. So let's have a fifth principle, the individuality principle, that takes into account that people enter into physical activity programs with different biological potentials for change, personal goals and interests, current activity patterns, fitness levels, psychosocial characteristics, and environmental determinants. This is also very important and fundamental principles. Each of us unique person, individuality. That means every workload, outer workload, should be adjusted, be optimal to our current individual state of physical fitness, of our condition, physical capacities, and so on. After we considered all 5 basic training principles, we will go to the next slide and have a look on components of physical activity session. And the first part of every training session is warming up. A warm-up is a low-intensity activity done before a full effort and should be organized to meet the goals of the main physical activity. The primary purpose of the warm-up is to prepare the participant for the moderate to vigorous physical activity that will occur during the session. For example, a person intending to engage in a vigorous physical activity, like a game of full-court basketball, would need to complete a more thorough warm-up than someone simply going out for a brisk walk. So this is important, and that means warming up is special. It's special according to the main part of your training. If a weightlifting gym, so your warming up should be different. For example, if you are preparing to play volleyball, or you will preparing to swimming training session. Warming up offers the following benefits. First, it increases active muscle blood flow. Why? Because our body, our muscles, require energy, ATP, oxygen, and other nutrients essential for muscle fiber contractions. The second one is increasing of blood flow to the heart. It is also important mechanism that facilitates effective training session. Next benefit is rising body temperature and may reduce the risk of muscular injury and soreness. Why is it so important? Body temperature. And how does it reduce the risk of muscular injury and even soreness? The answer is chemical reactions that is much more intensive when the temperature rises up, and the effectiveness of muscle fibers contraction will be much more higher than the temperature is higher too. That's why it's so important to have a quality warming up and not losing the temperature down, not cooling down during this part of training session. This is one of the most important aspects of warming up. So once we perform warming up, we keep this intensity, we keep this dynamic of training session to the end. Otherwise, we will lose our body temperature and the effectiveness of this training session will decrease significantly. So let's have a look on the fourth benefit that facilitates temperature regulation by causing earlier sweating. During warming up, quality warming up, our body, our organism adjusts for the workload performing in the activities that will come. Without warming up, these very complex and complicated processes and mechanisms will be not adjusted or will not be open up. So that's why it's so important to have a warming up with a good quality. So let's look again. 4 benefits and very important. So muscle blood flow. Blood flow to the heart facilitates cardiac functioning. Body temperature, very important and essential. And of course, temperature regulations. After we completed warming up, we should go to the main part of our training session. The main physical activity represents the core of the lesson of physical activity session and is intended to improve or maintain one or more of the health-related fitness components. The frequency, intensity, time and type of physical activity depend on the goals of the lesson, the length of the class period, and the current fitness level of individual students. So main physical activity is the core. Yeah? So this is the key word of this part of the training session. And every core of training session is a specific one. For example, if we have a volleyball training session, so we should, for example, consider improving serving the ball as the core of this class. So the main physical activity for this class will be learning or improving serving the volleyball ball, and so on. Also, please pay attention that we use and we rely on the FIT guidelines. Do you remember a few slides before? Frequency, intensity, time and type of physical activity. All these brings us structure to our main physical activity, to our core. So after we perform main physical activity, we go to cool down. A proper cool down includes a period of light activity following exercise that allows the body to slow down and return to near resting levels. The body needs this gradual recovery following exercise to reduce muscle stiffness and soreness, remove lactic acid, and prevent lightheadedness, dizziness, or even fainting. Stretching exercises should also be performed during the cool down because muscles are warmest and most pliable then, providing maximal benefit toward improvement flexibility. You see, cool down is very critical and important part of training, and not because we need to facilitate some metabolic reactions, but also to feel ourselves in a good shape. If we stop our training session rapidly, it could bring us very negative consequences. As I said before, fainting. We should avoid it. We can recover much more faster if we provide quality cool down each time when we will have trainings. So this is one of the important. And please have some time, 8, 10 or even 12 or more minutes for cool down. This is one of the most important parameters of effective physical activities. I would like to return to the slide with the basic training principles description and to say a few words about them. These principles are applied to bring about desired physiological changes through manipulation of the frequency, intensity, time, and type of the physical activity performed. The physiological changes that occur in response to regular physical activity or exercise are called training adaptations. Do you remember the beginning of this lesson where we consider workload and the effect of workload and adaptation? And it was mentioned that adaptation is the fundamental process or mechanism that applied by our bodies, our organisms, in order to adapt, to adjust, to be prepared for this overload. Also, it is needed to be mentioned that the overload principle should not be confused with the term overtraining. Overtraining is the condition caused by training too much or too intensely and not providing sufficient recovery time. Symptoms include lack of energy, fatigue, depression, aching muscles, loss of appetite, and susceptibility to injuries. Also, the progression principle is related very closely to overtraining situation. If too much overload is applied too soon, the risk for an overtraining or overuse injury increases, either of which may discourage or prevent a person from participating in continued physical activity. Conversely, the failure to progress frequency, intensity, or time may result in diminished training adaptations over an extended period. For specificity principle, it is important to consider that the physical activity program should always reflect the desired training outcome or adaptation. One more important issue should be added to the regularity principle description. This basic training principle helps to reinforce the importance of physical activity across the lifespan, because any improvements in fitness performance gained during an active childhood or adolescence are transient and will be lost following years of adult activity. Concerning components of physical activity session, it should be said also that every physical activity session should follow a systematic approach that includes a warm-up, main physical activity, and cool-down. This approach helps to ensure participant safety by preparing the body for the demands of physical activity and by providing a mechanism for a gradual reduction of workload at the end of the session. Properly warming up before and cooling down after physical activity may also prevent injuries and facilitate or aid in post-exercise recovery, respectively. The main physical activity must also be conducted appropriately for students to feel and understand through participation the importance of being physically active. This is the point. So it's not only about physical preparation, influence to muscles and organs, systems. It's also about psychology and mentality, the mood, the attitude to physical activity itself. So it all goes together, both physical and psychological, and developing some physiological or motor capacities. We are developing our some psychological characteristics, personalities too. For example, if we have a training of our endurance, of course we not only enhance our cardiorespiratory system potentialities, but also we enhance our load tolerance, for example. To assist you in training planning, it is reasonable for you to get to know some terms and definitions. And for example, in this class I would like you to present some definitions given by the National Association of Sport and Physical Education. So let's start with the term or definition: developmentally appropriate physical activity. What does it mean? So developmentally appropriate physical activity refers to activity of a frequency, intensity, duration, and type that leads to optimal growth and development and contributes to the development of future physically active lifestyle. Another definition is the moderate physical activity, that is defined as activity of an intensity equal to brisk walking and can be performed for relatively long periods of time without fatigue. Also, next definition that is related to the intensity is vigorous physical activity, that is defined as a movement that expends more energy or is performed at a high intensity than brisk walking. Some forms of vigorous activity, such as running, can be done for relatively long periods of time, while others may be so vigorous, for example sprinting, that frequent rests are necessary. As examples of moderate intensity aerobic training, we could mention active recreation such as canoeing, hiking, skateboarding, inline skating, brisk walking, bicycle riding, or stationary biking. Also, games that require catching and throwing, such as basketball, volleyball. Housework could be considered also as an example of moderate intensity aerobic training. As examples of vigorous intensity aerobic training, we could mention active games involving running and chasing, also bicycle riding, jumping rope, martial arts such as karate, running, sports such as soccer, basketball, swimming or tennis, dancing, and cross-country skiing. For such activities as muscle strengthening, the examples are push-ups and pull-ups, resistance exercises with exercise bands, weight machines, climbing wall, and others. And one more activity that is very important is bone strengthening. And the example exercises for this process is hopping, skipping, jumping, running, and also sports such as gymnastics, basketball, volleyball, or tennis. The last mentioned, bone strengthening, is a very important benefit because it facilitates and enhances bone mineralization, and it not only facilitates performance in sport gyms, but also in everyday life. For example, if it's snowy and slippery outdoor, it could eventually prevent some bone injuries, and this process of bone strengthening is important during all the lifespan. When we are young or old, it's a very important issue, health issue, that should be always be considered. And the last issue of this lesson that I would like to discuss with you is the duration of physical activity, for example, weekly. And here I would like to present some data of National Association of Sport and Physical Education that suggest for children and adolescents aged from 6 to 17 years of the age. So they recommend 60 minutes or 1 hour or more of physical activity daily. So that could be presented in different forms, not only training or exercising, but just performing walking or jogging, or performing some movement tasks during the day. Also, most of the 60 or more minutes each day should be either moderate or vigorous intensity aerobic physical activity. And vigorous intensity physical activity should occur on at least 3 days per week. So, you know definition what is moderate and vigorous physical activity it is. And this is the another guideline that leads us in direction that 60 or even more minutes every day should be devoted to physical activity, but moderate physical activity should be at least 3 days per week. Also, this association suggests that it should be accumulate at least 60 minutes and up to several hours of physical activity most days of the week. This daily accumulation should include moderate and vigorous physical activity, with the majority being intermediate in nature. Also, it is suggested that participation should be present in several bouts of physical activity lasting 15 minutes or more each day. One more recommendation is participation each day in a variety of age-appropriate physical activities designed to achieve optimal health, wellness, fitness, and performance benefits. Also, extended periods of inactivity are discouraged, especially during daytime hours. At the end of this lesson, you will have to complete the test with question regarding the theory of this class, and this video file will be available, so no any time limitations. You can leave comments below, any questions too. You can also communicate with me by Moodle platform. Find my name and just type your message, any question. All your questions or comments will be considered and answered. I see three directions of your, I expect actually three directions of your feedback. The first and the most important is the theory specifics. So if you have any questions, more detailed information about some theory, about some principles and mechanisms, I'm glad to answer your questions. The second direction of your feedback is some practical issues concerning, for example, some training methods or training planning, training design, and so on. And the third direction of your feedback is the organizational manner. That means is it comfortable for you to follow the link in the Moodle platform, to go to another platform on YouTube, and so probably is this a challenge for you or not? For example, maybe is it better, actually more convenient for you? I'm glad to get this kind of feedback for me, because I plan and to give you a lesson in a more convenient way for you to understand it, and to actually to motivate you in this subject. We will have lesson number 4 at the end of the March. You can find the date on the time schedule in the Moodle, in the course description in the Moodle platform. So it will be 19 minutes lesson, so material will be a little bit more specific probably, and difficult. So I will respond to your questions, probably some suggestion. And for now, I wish you a good day, and I hope we will see each other very soon, probably at our university, at theory lessons and practical classes too. So have a nice day.